Welcome to Solved, the political discussion show for people with attention spans and those looking to develop one. My name is Jay, and our other resident solvers today are Amanda and Deon, who will offer a greeting now.
Hey there.
Hello.
Collectively, we produce the venerable, indispensable, not to mention award-winning podcast Best of the Left, where humans, that's us, curate progressive media on a chosen topic, creating episodes that are greater than the sum of their parts. On this show, we use those same curation skills to pull together stories and ideas that help us solve some of society's biggest problems, because if we don't tell you how to think, someone dumber on the internet will. Today, we're going to tell you that fascism doesn't look the way you think it looks, and that you should make friends with your neighbors and watch what you say, in a manner of speaking. Starting with this article from Vox that says quite clearly, life in authoritarian states is mostly boring and tolerable. And I'll skip ahead to the part where the person says, look, this could sound like a defense of authoritarianism, no big deal. And they're like, no, it's the opposite of that. It's a warning about how the boringness of it and how it doesn't look like jackbooted thugs walking down your street and harassing you personally on a regular basis tricks people into thinking, well, maybe it's not happening or maybe it's not so bad. And then it just turns out that you don't have a democracy anymore and you just didn't notice. So it starts out, says, quote, the mental image that most Americans harbor of what actual authoritarianism looks like is fantastical and cartoonish. This vision has jackbooted thugs, all-powerful elites acting with impunity, poverty and desperate hardship for everyone else, strict controls on political expression and mobilization, and a dictator who spends his time ordering the murder or disappearance of his opponents using an effective and wholly compliant security apparatus, end quote. And of course, the reality is that life under authoritarianism is pretty normal, particularly if you're not a member of a targeted group. Like people go to work and they go home and they go grocery shopping and send their kids to school and whatnot. And in a lot of cases, it can be easy to not notice anything particularly different. But it goes on and says, quote, most Americans conceptualize a hypothetical end of American democracy in apocalyptic terms. But actually, you usually learn that you're no longer living in a democracy, not because the government is taking away your rights or passing laws that you oppose, or because there's a coup or a quisling. You know that you're no longer living in a democracy because the elections in which you are participating no longer can yield political change, end quote. So this is where we start, I was about to say remind, but I think a lot of people don't need reminding. They might need telling for the first time that your vision of fascism, the end point of it, even if you think like things have been really bad and Trump's really bad, and this is what fascism looks like, you might even still be thinking like, this is what fascism in the early days looks like, which could still be true, but that the implied vision might be, and then it's going to get really, 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 really demonstrably bad. And the fact is that might never happen. And so, we could end up sounding like Chicken Littles, or people might be hard to convince that something is really wrong because they don't see dictatorship the way they imagine it. And so those of us in the know need to know what it's going to look like.
I mean, the reality is that first paragraph you read, everything that you read is happening. It's just on a different scale than we imagine it to be happening when quote unquote full fascist authoritarian power has taken control. So like jackbooted thugs, yep, we have those. All powerful elites acting with impunity, yep, check. Like poverty and desperate hardship for a lot of people, yeah, that is definitely the case. Strict controls on political expression and mobilization, that's starting to happen. That has been creeping in for quite a long time. And disappearances are happening. So like there's a lot that is already here. It's just the scale. And I think that we forget that this is what I guess I would call modern American authoritarianism, which is going to be different. And I was just reading an op-ed from someone who studies Malaysian politics and someone else who was a dissident who had to leave Nicaragua. And the way they talk about it is, yes, there are scary things happening, but there are scary things happening to those who are either the targeted group or who are speaking out really strongly. Everyone else is kind of living daily life. And so those are modern authoritarian, let's call them non-democratic at the very least, states in our current world, and they don't look like Nazi Germany, right? The image that we think of when we think of Nazi Germany. And so that is a hurdle that we have to get through because while yes, we're seeing signs that the economy is going to get worse and that will definitely have a more visible and demonstrative impact on more people. Fact is, you can kind of live daily life for the most part if you are not an immigrant, a member of a group that is in Trump's crosshairs at the moment. Of course, at any point, anybody could be in the crosshairs of this administration and this movement.
I want to make an argument that fascism isn't impending. It's not, we're in the beginning stages. I want to make an argument that we have been a fascist state for at least 2 decades at this point. I think coming after 9/11, the Patriot Act, the 2003 invasion of Iraq, I think the parallels to Nazi Germany need to be extended outside the borders of America because we kind of just yada yada gloss over the fact that probably 1 million Iraqi people were killed because of lying us into war. That happened to people over there. It didn't happen to people within our borders. So it's a lot easier to ignore, move on from, not accept responsibility for, but it is directly because of American authoritarian policy when it comes to foreign policy. We regularly have seen that our elections don't yield political results. Like, this is a huge reason why Trump is in office in the first place, is because people for a long time have known that if you are not a rich person and you vote for someone, there's a real good chance that the reason you voted for that person is not going to happen. But if you're rich, you pretty much get what you want because that's how this country has functioned for a long time. I think Trump is such a bold, bright, shining red light of fascism that it's easy to see it now. But I think we've been living under this kind of normalized fascism for a long time. And I think a lot of the things we do, and I think a lot of the articles we're going to go over later, I think I can make an argument for we've been doing the things for a long time that we just haven't accepted it, that we are in a fascist state. Like the Nazi Germany comparison, the Holocaust. We are actively engaged in a Holocaust in Israel that, yes, it's over there. Yes, it's not necessarily explicitly the American government, but it is our bombs, it is our money. And now it's our contractors that are coming over here and saying, yes, actually, it is some Americans. So I think we've been in a very comparable Nazi fascism state for a long time. And it's time to catch up. And I think that's the part that Trump makes it less normal because Trump isn't normal. And that might be the weird benefit of Trump, is because he is so strange, it does shake people out of kind of a complacency that I think we all kind of live in America.
I definitely wouldn't go that far. And I think that there are other words that are better suited to describe the things that you laid out. I mean, things have been super messed up for a really long time, but elements of oligarchy, the effects of neoliberalism, the hangovers from the Cold War, the way, I mean, the hangovers from World War II and Americans' relationship with Israel is obviously more related to how America supports Israel, no questions asked. And I mean, and Israel has their own psychology that has led them to the point where they are now. So they have leaders who are actively carrying out a genocide, and we have leaders who are like, that's probably not happening. We support Israel. We're like unable to see clearly about it. And times are changing on that finally. Like, it only takes multiple years of ethnic cleansing to get people to wake up a little bit. But I think the effects of neoliberalism are profoundly at play when it comes to supporting the oligarchy and making it so that whether a Republican or a Democrat gets elected, to the presidency or controls the Congress, that we don't see laws passed that are dramatically different. I'm not one of those people who says that both parties are the same, it's a mono party, or anything like that. They are different, but not nearly as different as they need to be. And so I wouldn't say that we've been living in fascism, but the groundwork has been laid for a long time. There's actually the thing that came to my mind, I was surprised you didn't mention, is that Republicans have been trying to ban protest and make it legal to like run over protesters with your car for a really long time. I think it's been more than a decade that they've been beating that drum. And so the anti speech, anti protest, you don't actually have the right to disagree with the government. They've been beating that drum since before Trump was elected. And so there's been this rich vein of authoritarianism at the heart of the Republican Party that has been striving to break through and break into the leadership. And they've had some successes along the way. And now they're at their nadir of their strength. And so I think this is when it's time to recognize the pivot while also being totally clear-eyed about how we got here. Trump didn't invent the authoritarianism and take over the Republican Party and make them authoritarian as if they weren't already primed for it.
Yeah, I guess I agree. Like this stuff in either individual examples or more widespread over a longer period of time, like these types of things have been happening for a long time. It's about the scale, right? And I guess what I get nervous about when we talk about the fact that, well, it's been like this, like, yes, but if we don't recognize the rapid escalation of it and call it what it is, then we may miss the forest for the trees. I've definitely been thinking a ton about the Patriot Act. Like that has been in my brain constantly, especially when reading about Palantir and what's happening with their government contracts and what they're being tasked to do, and swearing in these people from the big tech companies into the military. I mean, that is stuff that was there but is now rapidly accelerating to a level that we haven't quite experienced before. And should we have paid way more attention when it started to happen before? Yeah. And like there were definitely people on the left saying, "Oh my god, we are going to deeply regret this one day." And there's so much about this administration that is really not, as Jay said, inventing it, but just ratcheting everything up and taking things that were already very exploitable and exploiting them to their utmost max possibility.
I think we're arguing on, scale and like
Mhm.
a spectrum, because I think we're saying the same thing, and maybe we're going to come to this, like words matter and it's important to say what things are. I just do think that the Patriot Act specifically, I think that would be, if you go back to the history books and this time period is written, that's going to be the keystone. That's going to be
Mhm.
something that
The
is
tipping point.
like right
Mhm.
there. I think that mass incarceration of Black people, that's part of this. You can live a normal life if you are not one of the minority groups that are targeted. Well, the Black people have been targeted in this country since this country was a country, and that hasn't changed. And I think a lot of what I feel, especially reading all these articles and just doing this show for the last couple of years, is that we've had a couple moments in our history right after Reconstruction and then right after the Civil Rights Act where there's these little blips where we actually are trying to build towards the democracy that we say we are. And we regress and we go backwards. And we've been watching the regression this last time from the Civil Rights Act since Reagan. So it wasn't fascism the day that Reagan was elected. It wasn't fascism the day that Bush was elected or Clinton, or there's not like this moment. And I think that's what the article's kind of saying. There isn't a moment where now it's this. I think maybe more accurately, we've been in the transition period to full fascism
Yeah.
for a long time. And now I was going to say it's unavoidable, but that's not true either, because it sure is avoidable to a lot of people. There's a lot of people who still aren't willing to acknowledge that any of this is out of the norm or even bad, because there are going to be people that benefit greatly from fascism. And that's going to be another issue we have to deal with too, because It's not all bad for everybody all the time.
At least temporarily.
Temporarily, sure.
Right. And the other element, of course, is that we are an empire.
Yes.
And just saying that has only really come into the mainstream. I mean, people outside the country have been saying that for much, much longer. But in terms of how we talk in our political sphere inside the country, that has only started to be said in a louder way in the last 15 years. And acknowledging that is a big part of acknowledging our outsized influence on everyone else, but also what we are willing to do to the citizens who live here, under the guise of safety, protection, and whatnot. And of course, the Republicans have latched on to that and really ramped that up into being. And so it's more exploiting the weak spots. And the weak spots come from fear, which we talk about a lot on this show, that the fear that this country has drummed up has helped prop up the empire and has helped lead us to this moment where people in this country are willing to comply, is really what it is. It's people here are willing to say, sure, I'm willing to give that up. I'm willing to give up my privacy. I'm willing to give up my freedom because I want to be safe. And so we have been handing our power away over that time, in addition to the crackdown becoming more and more severe.
Yeah, getting back to, like, I'm going to sort of more support Deon's point now. I'm going to come around a little bit because I lived through, the Iraq War was my political awakening. And so I was very tuned in to the Bush administration. And, I learned things like Mussolini's definition of fascism is the combination of government and corporations. And I was watching as Bush put all of the heads of corporations in charge of the departments that regulate those corporations. I was like, I know what 2 + 2 is. This is not complicated. And I mean, the conversation about the unitary executive theory was alive and well during the Bush administration.
Yeah.
I think he could have become a fascist and, controlled in a much more authoritarian way if he had wanted to. I kind of just think that his heart wasn't totally in it. I mean,
Yeah.
like line item vetoes. I haven't heard anyone talk about line item vetoes in a decade or more, but that was one of the big things, that Congress would pass a bill and then the president has the right to sign the bill into law or not sign it, sign a veto order. Those are his two options. And Bush was like, how about if I veto some of the things in it? How about if I just scratch out some stuff I don't like and sign the rest into law? And everyone lost their minds over that because that is such an overreach of executive power. Like, that is not how it works. It's never been how it works. Don't even pretend like you're going to be able to do that. And, if Trump tried that, no one would blink. We would just think, well, I mean, yeah, what's Congress going to do? Hold him to account? Obviously not. What are the courts going to do? Hold him to account? Obviously not. And so Bush had some of those. I mean, I don't know that he had the instincts, but he had people working for him who were laying the groundwork. They were like, we need the unitary executive. We need this bozo from Texas to do our bidding for us. And so let's move on to the next article. Rituals of conformity in Nazi Germany, which involve the flying of flags and the salutes and the greetings of Heil Hitler. I swear that living through the mid-2000s was the closest America has been to having rituals of conformity since maybe World War II, but it would have been completely different. Amanda's grandmother always talked about the great feeling of unity that was in the country during that time. It was like, it would be nice if we could be that unified without the war. But the attack on 9/11 created a scenario in which flying flags became political. That wasn't a political thing before, really. It became aggressive, and saluting the troops, thanking troops for their service was basically mandatory. And then small things, politicians wearing American flag pins.
I was just going to say the pins. That was,
They never did that before, and they're still doing it to this day. That is a hangover from 9/11. We all have to fly our flags, and at least we did until people figured out that the war was bullshit. We all had to thank the troops and put the support the troops ribbon stickers on your car. All of those things, those are rituals of conformity similar to what was implemented in Nazi Germany, but not nearly to the extent as was implemented in Nazi Germany. But boy, if Bush wanted to turn the screws on people, he could have. He really could have. And things could have gone downhill much, much faster, much earlier. And it turned out he didn't. I don't think his heart was really in it.
He had some people around him whose heart was in it. That's for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the people Trump has around him, I do think are worse. But, as Hitler should have, Bush went off and became a painter and
he painted, the soldiers he sent to war.
Right. That's where his heart is. But we've been laying the groundwork for a long time.
And that's the main difference between Trump and Bush. I think Trump won 2016. The people he was surrounded by were very similar to the people that Bush was surrounded by. That, yes, they did want, a unitary executive. They did want more power in the executive branch. They were fascist adjacent, I guess we could say. Those people still had a limit that they didn't want to go all the way. And now this version of Trump, none of those people are in the same positions. It's all sycophants who are willing to, as I read today when we are recording this, have a meeting to deal with the Epstein situation, to work public relations on how to make Trump's years-long, publicly available, on the record, factual connections to Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell go away. So that's who these people are now. So they are fully willing to go all the way and let Trump do whatever it is he wants, because Trump is a lot more like Hitler than George Bush ever could have been.
Yeah, I'll put it this way. Another element of Bushism was it was said, not ironically at the time, that to not support George W. Bush was to be anti-patriotic.
Yeah.
That is as, fascist as you can imagine, with an authoritarian leader who, demands that everyone agree with him all the time. But people still said, fuck you, that's stupid, get out of here. And again, like Bush just didn't turn the screws on that. And I think the difference is that the administration, the people working for him, they tried to use that as a tool. They tried to use executive authority as a tool. They tried to use the scam of hyper-patriotism as defined by supporting your dear leader. They tried to use those as tools for the sake of building empire. The whole PNAC, Project for a New American Century, that was the neocons at the heart of the Bush administration. That was their goal. It was empire for America. It was power for America. Trump is about power for Trump. Trump's administration is about power for Trump. Trump's sycophants are about power for Trump. That's the difference. They're not using power for Trump as a tool for something else. That is the end game. They just are actually in a cult and want Trump to have power. And then, arguably people like Stephen Miller are like, yeah, I'm going to use fascism to get rid of all the brown people that scare me. But most of the people are, they might have their own sort of pet causes that they're interested in. But if you are not a Trump sycophant, you're not in the administration right now.
Yeah. But you know what? I think the Heritage Foundation kind of miscalculated. There are many on the right who are trying to use Trump as a tool, right? They think this is the way to get their world order. And they may be right, but they are not necessarily the sycophants in the sense that they truly believe Trump should be the supreme leader. A lot of the supporters and voters are, but those organizations are like, yeah. Let's just get what we need to get to. And then we'll put in place who we want to be the actual leader of everything. He's a means to an end, and he doesn't realize that. There are big powers working behind the scenes that he does not really understand.
He doesn't, but he also fully believes that he is the country.
Yeah.
But as of recording this, I think it was yesterday, he was walking around on the roof of the White House in theory, just examining the new space where he's going to turn...
surveying the land.
Turn the White House into the new Palace of Versailles. But with all these sycophantic reporters that are in the press pool now, because real press is not really necessarily allowed, they're shouting questions at him, and they ask him what he's doing. And he said exactly these words. He said, just looking for ways I can spend my money. And I think it connected him that he may need to change that a little bit, because then he said, looking for ways that I can spend my money for the country.
Yeah.
Because the first one was the honest one. He
Yep.
thinks all the money of the United States is his. All the tariffs that are happening, like the EU one specifically, he said was a gift to him so that he could use it for the country. He thinks he's the country. And if the Heritage Foundations thinks you can use someone who genuinely believes that they are the country as a tool, like, you're right. That's a miscalculation, because he's gone beyond being controlled, because those heritage folks, they're going to be pushed aside. It's only sycophants.
Yeah, well,
I don't know about that. That's an interesting prediction. I guess we'll find out. I kind of think they still have the actual control.
I hope they all
but,
fight.
You know, we'll see. Yeah, I know. I want them to
viciously.
just eat each other's faces and
Yeah, so someone's miscalculated. I mean, they
Right.
miscalculated about Hitler too. The business leaders thought, well, he's a doofus, but he'll be good for business and we'll support him in the meantime. And they badly miscalculated. So continuing on with these comparisons, I just want to talk more about the rituals of conformity in Nazi Germany, because this show is the idea was to warn people about what may be coming and what it may look like. And so in Nazi Germany, the three things that they talk about in this little piece are the Hitler salute, the display of flags, and one I hadn't heard of, the charitable contributions to the Winter Relief Organization. And so on the Hitler salute, that is not something that came into effect all at once. It was a slow burn, as a lot of these things are going to be. And so to give a sense of how people react, because you might think, well, I'm an American, I'm not going to do something like that. I'm going to tell people to fuck off. Well, Germans thought that too. And starts out, says, quote, precisely because the use of the Hitler salute became normative, Germans could voice criticism of the regime by using a more traditional greeting, exclaiming Heil Hitler with demonstratively little enthusiasm, or crossing the street to avoid acquaintances expecting to hear it. And I mean, of course, also people continued saying Guten Tag or whatever else. And that was a way of showing your discontent with the regime. People would get in fights about it and tell you, no, you're supposed to say Heil Hitler, obviously, and be a pain in everyone's ass. So as these things get implemented, they become tools of the regime, but also mechanisms for expressing discontent. Same for flag waving, talking about the new Nazi swastika flag. It says, quote, some, as a means for avoiding the swastika, hoisted the red, white, and black flag of the old German Empire. Some raised the flags of their states or municipalities. But as it became clear that failure to display the Nazi flag could result in negative consequences, people began to display the Nazi flag defensively to preempt stigmatization by the authorities. And they found a loophole. It says, quote, one could, for example, display a large flag of the German Empire while appending a much smaller swastika flag to its side. But such practices ended in 1937 when a new decree expressly banned the flying of flags other than the Nazi one, end quote. So the point is that it's always a slow burn. It's not that it's only fascism at the end. The point is to recognize the pattern as it emerges, because it always does.
It's also interesting to see it this way. Like, you can see how fragile fascism is, because having the German flag and a small swastika, that's not enough. It's not enough. It's a sign that you don't actually support it enough. There's never going to be a point in fascism where it's pure enough, where it's strong enough, because it's such a fragile, weak ideology that they have to keep pushing it and have to keep pushing it. And it'll fail, because no one wants to live that way. Like, no human being wants to live in a state where you have to do exactly what the dear leader says at all times. Even when you're not at work, when you're at home, because you might be observed by neighbors. And that part of it, like, if everything has to be watched at all times, then what you're trying to protect is flimsy at best. And that's gonna be harder going forward with the Palantirs of the world, with YouTube and Spotify and putting your ID online, and just kind of a surveillance state that Hitler could have only dreamed of.
Yeah.
We're going to be fighting against something much bigger in scope, but still at its heart, it is fragile. It is weakness. It is this desire to have everything fit this small little box that gets smaller and smaller over time.
Well, it's built on a kind of a dream, really. That's all it's built on, this kind of laundry list of vague ideas about how things should be. And we're people, we change our culture constantly, we evolve our ideas constantly. And what fascists want is to lock in and then have that be it for a long time. And like, we don't operate that way. That's not how humans are. And that is just one additional reason why these governments fail in the end. But just a matter of how long, right? But I was thinking about a few years ago, Jay and I went to Berlin and we went to the Holocaust Museum in Berlin. This is a research trip. And they have this room where they have these long panels hanging from the ceiling and they go on for quite a ways, like across the entire room. And what is on those panels is a list of the decrees or, new rules, etc., from the time Hitler came to power through the end. And what I noticed about that room, which was very, it hits you just how much they were trying to do and how quickly, is that a lot of the really shocking stuff, like you say, oh my God, I can't believe he's doing that. That didn't happen right away. Those things took like a few years before they really started to ramp things up. And so what I've noticed about this administration is we are only 7 months in. They have gone fast. They have gone fast because I think deep down they know this is going to be hard to control. It's going to be hard to stay in power and get these things done. And I'm hoping anyway that that's actually going to be part of their downfall. They're trying to change too much too fast. They're trying to crack down too hard too fast because people, like with, most social change, you have to like get accustomed to it, which, as we've just been talking about, that's kind of what's been happening to us over the last probably 30 years or so, is we've been getting accustomed to invasions of privacy and a police state and all of that kind of stuff. But I get this sense that they are concerned that they will not have the time to lock in everything that they want to get in. And this situation in Texas with the gerrymandering is another point for me that says we have to move quickly, we have to move quickly, we have to move quickly. And I think that in some places they will be successful, and in other places we as a country will not have the stomach for stuff, and that will start to chip away at their power. I mean, one can only hope. I'm trying to inject a little bit of hope in here as we talk about really, really dark, sad things.
I was just thinking about the moving fast and what you can do and what you can't do. And my mind went back to George W. Bush. And what I thought was he had a choice. He could have gone to war or made himself an authoritarian near dictator at home.
Mhm.
He had the political capital to do one or the other, but probably not both. And if he had, they did a lot with things like the Patriot Act, and they consolidated the Department of Homeland Security. Like, we didn't use the word homeland before. And before
Mhm.
that, the only
Yep.
people we knew who used that was Hitler. It was like,
Or
why are
Russia.
we like, hey, homeland? Maybe not, but that's the direction they went. And he could have said, we're locking it down. We're locking down the whole country to
Mhm.
keep us safe. And he could have gone that direction.
And that's the playbook. That is what authoritarian leaders have done. They actually instigate a horrific event and then they consolidate power, or they wait for one to happen. I mean, look at what Netanyahu did, for fuck's sake,
Yeah. If Bush hadn't had the imperialists in his cabinet saying we have to go to war, it doesn't really matter who with, we think the attacks came from Iran, but there are better targets in Iraq, so let's go there instead, like that sort of thing, then we might have just had a lockdown situation. And then there's the like, I don't know the details of the story behind Saddam Hussein maybe trying to assassinate George H.W. Bush, but I definitely know that George W. Bush thought, well, he tried to kill my daddy. And like the
Mhm.
degree to which that influenced international politics and the deaths of
Yeah.
hundreds of thousands of people, it shouldn't be understated. Like,
Very Greek myths.
yeah, like these are just like small dudes with petty squabbles that they then use the lives of millions of people to play out. But the third element I mentioned before, the charity drives that the Germans had. This is the one I hadn't heard of before, and I held it to the end because I can just so imagine how something like this, it won't be this, it'll be just something like this, could be used the way we find things to, stoke anger. That's sort of like the definition of our politics now, is anger being stoked back and forth, definitely more by one side than the other. So this says about the charity drives for the Winter Relief Organization, quote, during the first couple of years of Nazi rule, when unemployment in Germany remained high and the number of needy cases was in fact high, even anti-Nazis could give to the winter relief with a clear conscience. But for the regime, encouraging personal charity was not enough. It framed the winter relief politically as an opportunity to demonstrate one's readiness to sacrifice for the Volk. And going on, it says, collectors armed with lists of donors appeared at people's homes soliciting contributions. Donors were rewarded with a certificate posted on their door, in the process stigmatizing neighbors whose door remained unmarked. This just reminded me of the support the troops stickers on people's cars.
Mm-hmm.
Continuing, it says, the Nazi Party maintained records of who contributed and how much, and this information was included in evaluations of political reliability provided by the party to Germans applying for jobs or educational opportunities. Not uncommonly, newspapers published lists of citizens who had not contributed, which sometimes resulted in angry demonstrations of Nazi activists in front of homes, end quote. So, I mean, can we imagine someone being doxxed and having angry MAGA supporters showing up at their house or sending pizzas to their house to demonstrate that we know where you live? I mean, the parallels are stark. So, we don't have a winter relief fund, and probably Trump would see that as a sign of weakness. So that's not going to be how it works. But finding something that starts out as innocuous to then turn political to use as a weapon against your enemies, that's kind of his whole deal.
Yeah. I mean, it reminded me when I read that about, I think it was 2 shows ago, we did a show called Under Pressure about all of the pressure release valves in society. We talked a lot about GoFundMe and also discussed how GoFundMe is going to be like basically the new FEMA, because as they destroy FEMA, it'll be used more and more for disaster relief efforts. And again, yeah, as Jay said, it's not going to be exactly the same. It's going to be something different. But as we chip away at the services that this country offers through tax dollars, we're probably going to have to be in a situation where there is something like that, and then it will be co-opted and used as a political weapon or tool in some way. Just bundles of joy.
This is, I mean, there's not a happy, sunshiny way to talk about this. There's not a lot of like, hey, fascism, but it'll be okay. It's not going to be okay for a while. And if you really care, you're not going to feel great about it. You're going to be upset, and you are going to need to figure out a way to protect your own sanity in a not sane time, because we're living in a bad place, and you can choose to ignore it if you want to, but if you're listening to the show, obviously that's not an option for you. So we're going to have to deal with the reality as it is, and we're going to have to still live our lives, because you don't get to just opt out of daily.
Yeah.
Like, you still got a job, probably got responsibilities, everybody's got bills. So that's the banality of evil. Like, we're watching the banality of evil mixed with the ludicrousness of evil at the same time with Trump. That's the Bush Trump comparison, I think, is so great. And I'm glad you brought up Jay. He could have done this if he wanted to, because I remember distinctly there was real concern about not having an election, because
Yep.
we're under threat of war. Like, we could maybe, they're coming to get us because they hate us for our freedom, so maybe we should stop. And now Trump is actively just saying he's gonna steal the election. Like, whatever you want to, however you want to describe it, but the Texas gerrymandering is just, we're changing the way elections work, and they're just going to work for us.
If you remember, the reason George W. Bush got reelected was because people kept saying, well, he should just be the one to finish the job
Mm.
since he got in there. I remember at the time just being like, what a bizarre argument.
He did such a great job.
Bizarre argument. And it comes from fear. It comes from some kind of fear like, oh, well, if we don't reelect him, like something will happen. And that fear gave him another, and his entire really maniacal administration, another 4 years.
I was just looking up change horses in midstream because I actually didn't know how far it went back. And I don't know if they used it about Bush, but I know progressives used it about like that conversation and how stupid it was. But what I just found is from an 1864 speech by Abraham Lincoln in reply to delegation from the National Union League who were urging him to be their presidential candidate. An old Dutch farmer who remarked to a companion once that it was not best to swap horses when crossing streams. But yeah, it's a deep old instinct that probably doesn't make a lot of sense. On the psychology of what despotism does to people, Deon, thanks for transitioning us straight to our next article. Unsurprisingly, it's not good. Living under authoritarianism, people don't like it. It's bad for their mental health, and a lot of bad things happen. We're just going to gloss over some highlights, but all of our articles are always listed in our show notes. At a high level, what ends up happening to people, it says, quote, citizens often focus on survival rather than progress, which stunts community development and individual potential. Instead of striving for innovation, many citizens look for ways to cope with despotism. If you're paying attention, and for a lot of people, you don't have a choice whether you're going to pay attention, a lot of your mental energy just goes to figuring out how to cope. And, Deon, you mentioned like you got to take care of yourself. So some suggestions from this article: build support networks. Encouragement from friends and family can be a lifeline, which is not a metaphor, as gets discussed in another article, actually. Engagement in the arts, community organizing, education programs, mindfulness practices, political awareness, like the things you don't really need to be told to you in a list, but to be maybe just reminded, no, you're not wrong to think, yes, all of these things are actually the ways forward. They are the ways to not just fight back to the degree that you can, but in the act of fighting back, it does help your personal mental health. And in a sort of circular feedback loop, helping yourself, caring for yourself is a form of resistance, because you cannot fight back in any way if you're completely burned out. And the article also just talks about resilience in general and the sort of the need for it, obviously, but also the way despotism actually reveals the resilience that people already have. It says, ultimately, examining the psychological impact of despotism reveals a complex landscape influenced by fear, resilience, and community. Just like a tree that bends in strong winds, citizens often flex their resilience to survive, adapt, and resist. And, we've been talking about how to foresee and how to recognize when it arrives what authoritarianism looks like in concrete detail in your lived experience, but in your personal emotional experience, understanding that these things are coming, there will be fear, but there will also be resilience. And there will be not only a need for community, but an instinct for community. I mean, we've been sort of harping on people needing better connections with their community for a long time for a lot of different reasons, not related to authoritarianism. And one of the biggest problems is, well, even if you want community, the people near you might not, or I don't have time for that, or yeah, I mean, that's nice, but anyway, like I'm going on vacation, I'm kind of busy. Or after decades of diminishing community ties, people then are out of the habit of it. And there's like, oh, community sounds like a good idea, but I don't even know how to do it. But as authoritarianism creeps in, your instinct for community will be matched by other people's instinct. And so the ability to build community ties will be easier. And so these are, I mean, silver lining on a dark cloud is, probably an apt metaphor, because the dark cloud is going to do a lot of damage. But these are the things to look for that are the literal and metaphorical lifelines that we need to get through these dark times.
And I think these are kind of bigger concepts, but there are strategic, actual things that can be done too in community, like trainings and going with a group of people to bear witness to something awful or try to prevent something awful from happening. That community can extend beyond just getting you through your daily life and can be part of your larger activism and resistance against what is going on. I mean, when you read about, and actually, I'm in the process of collecting some books on the resistance in Europe under Nazi Germany, because when you read about things that people did, it can seem kind of like, how the hell did they build this, you know, wide web of people who all are in the know and all know the right code words and they can all trust each other, or there is some concern about trust, but they basically can. And like, you're kind of like, how the hell does that work? Like, that seems impossible. And it is really hard, but the reason it worked in Europe in certain places is because people knew each other. They knew they could trust that person because they actually had a relationship in their community or within their network of people. That's how. And so you have to have the strong ties in order to do anything else, because everything based in resistance is based on trust.
I'm gonna not take the Andor bait and
I
derail this entire podcast.
Setting
I'm
you
not
up.
gonna do it.
Okay.
But there's an element of needing to do something that I think Andor shows in a way that I recently watched a video of this lady talking about how TikTok isn't showing any of the 24/7 protests in LA going on right now. I guess it's kind of shut down on their algorithm. But in that video, she says, not everyone needs to be on the front lines. And then she goes up through all these steps and all these people that, what you need, all these other steps that lead up to having a real resistance movement. And like, Andor, there's a scene where Cassian Andor talks to one of the resistance members who you wouldn't know just looking at him because he's a concierge at a hotel.
Right.
He's not on the front line. He doesn't have a gun. He's just doing a little part. And that's all of this is going to be little parts. Not everybody needs to be living the Che Guevara life. That's not how any of this is going to work. And if you expect that, you're going to be miserable, because if you're listening to this podcast, you're not that person. Like, we're not those people. Like, that's not who we are, probably. But there is something you can do. You can contribute. Right now, my family, we are growing vegetables and we have a little farm stand. And that is a way to meet people and talk to people that you wouldn't see otherwise. That's something that we can do. That's not something everybody can do, but just little things like that do build those connections so that you can have trust, and you don't necessarily need the secret code words because you just know each other. Like, we are definitely missing that. And I think a lot
don't
of that...
start saying I have friends everywhere to people you meet. Everyone will know what you're doing.
I mean, I've said it a couple times. Like, it's a good test. Okay, we can't have this conversation about Andor that I want to have. But I've been thinking about this in a way that human beings, I don't think, are really good at conflict resolution. We are conflict averse, and we don't want to have uncomfortable conversations. And the people that think they're good at conflict, like the fighters and the most violent people, are probably the worst at conflict resolution, because rather than having a conversation, accepting that someone is different than you, accepting that someone has a different opinion than you, and that's okay, they'd rather kill them. Those are the worst people. And that's kind of like lionized in our culture and seen as like big, strong, I'm not afraid of a fight. Yeah, you are. You're afraid of a real fight, a real argument where you might not agree at the end, but you come to some sort of better understanding. Part of community building is having these conflicts with people, mini conflicts, and learning to disagree in a way that functions. And that's democracy. Democracy is a giant conflict resolution machine, and fascism and authoritarianism is ignoring it, pushing it aside, and killing everyone that disagrees with you. Which one sounds better? Like, I know that I guess there is a pull and there is an allure to fascism. There clearly is, because it keeps coming back. But I think if people got better at just day-to-day conflict resolution, we could really make some changes that make democracy a lot more possible too.
The other element is people do the kind of extreme things that you're talking about out of fear. And we talk a lot about how the right is just filled with fear. They are just consumed by it. And trying to pierce through some of that and realize that, like, it's not as scary as they've been telling you. And when I say it's not scary, I don't mean what's happening on the large scale. I just mean each other. We are not as scary. Your neighbor is not as scary. The person who, voted the other way is not as scary as you think each other are, right? That's part of the problem we have. And when you start having conversations, you start to realize that. But the problem that I can see, and I feel it sometimes myself right now, is the fear from the other side who's not in power right now. Like, it's very easy to say, well, I'm just not going to get involved because this is too much. This is too scary. The threat is too large. And that's what stops somebody from doing even the little step, even being the hotel attendant at the desk, right? Who helps along. Like, people get scared, rightfully so. This is scary stuff. This is not, people are getting pulled off the street for writing out beds and detained. And, this is, we live in scary times. But as this article points out, small actions that actually foster hope and that can start to nullify or at least dull down some of that fear. You can't live in just a constant state of fear, which, of course, ends up turning into anxiety and can be crippling in other ways. It's not a sustainable way to be. And so the only way to start to chip away at that is to do something to start to feel better in terms of maybe this won't last forever. Maybe my small little contribution will make someone's life better or someone's day better, or maybe start to chip away at the larger powers that be. That is the mechanism to get away from the fear.
Next up, we have an article about language and the way it gets completely perverted under authoritarian regimes. The title of the article is The Language of Surrender, and they give many examples of how language is getting completely bent and warped out of shape entirely. They brought up the Paul Weiss law firm scenario where Trump signed an executive order that put pressure on these law firms. And so they agreed to pro bono work for Trump. And the article points out that pro bono actually means for the good of the public, for the public good. But of course, doing work for the president of the United States and his personal interests is not necessarily in the public good. And so it's much more fitting to call it paying protection money, because that's what it is. So using a phrase like we're doing pro bono work is a way of papering over reality. And that's what we see over and over again. Doge was all about eliminating waste, which we know is bullshit. And it was to cover up, paper over the illegal purge of civil servants that they were doing. Congress, the article points out, is deferring to executive authority, but in reality, they're in constitutional dereliction of their duty because they are a completely separate branch of government and have a specific job to do, and they're basically not doing it. The judiciary, it is said, is being reformed, but of course, with every new ruling that comes down from the Supreme Court, the courts themselves are simply being subordinated to executive will. And we should say that the courts are making themselves irrelevant, because if the president wants to do it, they can, and nothing the president wants to do can be illegal. Therefore, there's no point to courts anymore. And so it gives advice on resistance and says, quote, when the Trump administration prohibited CDC officials from using terms like evidence-based and science-based, scientists and medical professionals responded with public ridicule and continued using accurate terminology despite the directive. And it goes on, quote, the most powerful resistance begins with the refusal to participate in the lies. When language is being corrupted all around you, insist on clarity in your own speech. When euphemisms replace reality, speak plainly about what you observe. When institutions abandon linguistic precision for political convenience, hold them accountable by naming the contradiction. End quote. So more things that, I wish we could say that these are things to look out for. They might be on the horizon, but of course they are right here, right now.
I mean, since we've been talking about the Bush administration, there were charges of Orwellian speak during the Bush administration, and they were absolutely doing that and using really highly crafted language to change the meaning of things and change the sound of things. And this is just, I mean, I think the way that this administration is doing it is like, we know it sounds ridiculous and we don't care. So they're not even really trying that hard. They're not running the focus groups to find these words. They're just flat out lying, which is a method of propaganda. And if you don't have any shame about it and you aren't even bothering to try to make it sound like something reasonable, then, it's harder for critics to go after it. But I liked how this article framed it. Just go after it anyway. Like, say the real words that are what we should be saying. I mean, I get pretty pissed when I'm reading articles and the news media is using the language of the administration. I kind of lose it. And the fact that the only time I've seen them start to say things as they really are is actually when talking about the Epstein files. They have consistently, many major outlets have consistently kind of added on which seems to be a distraction from the Epstein files, or, it will counter the administration's narrative. Everything else, they are doing the stenography, it seems, and not really evaluating the terms that are being used, the waste, fraud, and abuse in particular. They just did not push back hard enough on that all spring, while that was the constant refrain. Yeah, it's important. You can't stop.
2 quotes came to mind. The truth shall set you free, from the Bible. And then in the time of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. That's George Orwell. What I see, especially like Trump specifically, a pathological liar, so twisted up in telling just falsehoods. That's his whole existence. He seems like the most miserable, least free person on earth right now. He just is just in a web of nonsense that he's told about himself, and everything he does is trying to shape reality to fit a false narrative, as opposed to just being honest and saying things that are true. And that's a lot of the problem that we have, like why we got here with the news media, because they didn't hold people to account. They didn't hold George Bush to account. They didn't hold Obama to account. They didn't hold anybody to account for all the things that have led us here, because they did do stenography and they did want access, as opposed to telling the truth. And sometimes the truth is partisan. That's just a fact. Sometimes when you say something, it's going to offend one political party, usually the one that's in power right now, but it can go both ways, where you can just say this is wrong. And the media has abdicated their role of being the fourth estate. You're supposed to hold power to account, and you can't hold power to account if you just want them on your set so you can talk to them. They haven't done a good job of that, and it's been easy for Trump to put them in check. And now that they are being sued, and now that they are self-censoring, the truth is going to be harder to find in corporate media. It never was that easy, because again, it's corporate media. They have a motivation that isn't necessarily telling the truth. It's about getting your eyeballs and your attention and watching the ads. But now, more than ever, if someone says something that's not true, one of the most powerful things you can do as an individual is just say why it's not true and say what the true thing is.
My favorite reaction so far to the funding being cut to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, as is so often the case, comes from The Onion. And, they interview people on the street about real news. And so they satirically asked people what they thought about this news. And James Quinn, a microphone adjuster, fitting for today, we had to do a lot of microphone adjusting before the show today, could have used his help. His response was simply, How could you trust any media institution without a profit motive?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which brings us to our final article of the day, How to Live Under Authoritarianism, which might as well be the title of today's episode. And this one is big and long and detailed, and the link is in the show notes. You should go read the whole thing. But to go over the highlights, of course, step one of living under authoritarianism is to understand it, which is what we've been doing today, knowing their playbook, knowing that they are going to demonize the press, undermine the judiciary, consolidate executive power, rewrite history, turn marginalized communities into scapegoats, criminalize dissent, justify it all in the name of safety, a mythologized golden age, or an imagined Third Reich-like future that demands total obedience today to reach. So we kind of know what their plan is, or some version of that plan is always what gets put in place. Also, they will attack information. It says, in every authoritarian regime, surveillance expands because it must. Information is power, and controlling it is how regimes preempt organizing, silence dissent, and instill fear. And so, your digital footprint becomes a map of your relationships, your beliefs, and your vulnerabilities. And so it says, therefore, here's some concrete steps: secure your digital life. Now is the time to use encrypted messaging apps like Signal and WhatsApp. Make sure critical information is encrypted when transmitting it to others. Avoid sharing, identifying, or organizing information in public spaces. And I think most importantly for an audience like ours, teach your friends and family how to do this too. I think that is the role of a lot of people like us who are deeply plugged in. And, I've been using Signal for years and I encrypt everything I use, but I could probably do a better job of telling everyone I know to do the same. We try to do episodes on it from time to time, but that's information that needs to get out and is not second nature to people. These are things that need to be taught. These are either skills or techniques or technologies that people are not introduced to by default necessarily. And so we in the know need to be the ones to help spread that word and lend a guiding hand when possible.
Yeah, the personal information point in this article, they say, what did Doge go after immediately? Every citizen's personal information. And we know why. And, now they've just launched this apparently optional medical records thing where you can just input all your information. They don't even have to take it from you. You'll just do it yourself and input all your medical information and there be a registry. And we've done an entire show about how dangerous this is to have unified records in the government of people's personal information. And there is a reason, a very good reason, why it has been separate across agencies for a very long time, and at least since Nixon. And that is really important. So, we live our lives these days more online, and we have to adapt to what that means when it comes to being vulnerable. Even if you can't imagine what they would do with your information, because I think for a lot of people, we can't imagine the nefarious reasons that someone would want all your information. Just trust that there are people who nefariously want to use your information. Just know that that is true. I often cannot come up with the evil things that some of these tech billionaires are talking about pretty openly on podcasts, but I think most people who aren't in that world don't listen to. They got big ideas. They got plans. So just know that. That's really all you need to know, and do your best to learn how to protect yourself online and in every instance where you run into your information being digitally held somewhere.
Well, I'll help people imagine a little bit because that reminds me exactly of the totally innocuous and voluntary donations to the Winter Relief Organization.
Right.
It starts out as voluntary and innocuous, and then look, like, I'm not saying that they're going to make it mandatory that you upload your healthcare information to the federal government, but they might make it so that you don't have access to Medicare if you don't.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good example.
And so it becomes a lever of coercion.
Yeah.
And that is the whole premise behind why the federal government made the very conscious decision to not have unified information systems, is so the government wouldn't be able to coerce the citizens. They thought about it. They had this debate. They discussed how we should do it. They thought, well, it'd be more efficient if we just had one big database with all the information. And they're like, nope, that's too dangerous. We can't do that. We shouldn't do that. And they decided not to. And Trump has come in with the tech bros, encouraging efficiency overall because they don't care about humans in any sense. And so they're going full steam ahead on what the country already decided decades ago would be too dangerous of a path to pursue. And they're going down that path, and the people don't even know that connection. They don't remember that debate. Hardly anyone was alive when we were having this discussion last time. And so people don't even know the dangers.
Yeah. And just to call it out, the episode we did is Solve Number 7, The Deficiency of Efficiency, Why Government is Inefficient by Design, and much more. Go check it out.
I mean, another old school cliche, knowledge is power. These guys now, data is power. They know the more data they have, the more powerful they get. None of these people are really making anything of importance other than data collection. That's where they're making all their profit. Again, like Amanda said, if you can't imagine how they're going to use it, they have definitely imagined it. Yep. That's all they think about. It's clear that power and being the king of the world is the motivation for all these people, and humanity be damned. And if they need to get rid of some people, who cares? If they need to hurt some people, who cares? They need to know all they need to know about everyone at all times because of this fundamental human flaw that they have that they haven't dealt with, this fear of anything being different. They want everything to fit into this narrower and narrower box again, and we're not all going to fit. And they're going to try to make us. So don't comply in advance. Don't give them your information. Make it as hard as possible. There are tools that make it difficult. Use a VPN. Get you a VPN immediately if you don't have one. And just gum up the works.
Yep.
We already mentioned it today, but this article also talks about the importance of making local friends and forming community with them. And this is the article that points out that it's not a metaphor. It says, do you know who checks in on your elderly neighbors? Who organizes childcare if schools shut down? Who has a generator, a first aid kit, a car, a safe house? So, knowing people isn't just about organizing and resisting. It is an actual lifeline for if things go bad. And that doesn't have to have anything to do with an authoritarian state. It's just authoritarianism is like a good excuse to meet your neighbors because you're going to benefit from that anyway. Don't worry, global warming is going to give you a reason to need your neighbors at some point in the future.
Yeah. And mutual aid, we are going to see some shit. I remember many months ago or right after the election, we were talking about, someone wrote an article about joining a food co-op in their community and getting involved in that kind of thing. And the reality is it's not necessarily about fascism. It could be a crop that completely dies and you need to find a way to feed people, right? There are so many other things that we are dealing with right now. Our grid is overextended. We've already had brownouts and blackouts. These things might become more likely, and especially in disaster scenarios where now we know nobody's coming, it seems, to save you if something really bad happens in the form of a natural disaster. You have to be able to pull together quickly and get those collective resources working for your community. And that's just sadly the world we live in now, and not even necessarily only related to the political aspect.
Next up, document everything. And it says, one of the first things authoritarian regimes do is erase memory. What happened yesterday becomes a lie. What happened today is fake news. The only truth that matters is what the supreme leader says today. And there's an old saying that the internet never forgets, but that actually only remains true if people make the concerted effort to fight the concerted effort to memory hole things that the regime decides to delete. People have to actually have records so that they can be reposted later. That is how we maintain an understanding of the past. And they will absolutely try to, I mean, they start just by saying, don't believe your eyes. They will eventually get to the point of actively suppressing things so that you cannot find the information you're looking for. Hey, I remembered that. I swear that happened. Why is there not an article about that? Why can I not find that?
And it's happening.
Yep, it's happening all the time. And I think right now, the Jeffrey Epstein case specifically is a great example of actively watching them try to change information that we know to be true and trying to scrub it from the internet, scrub it from our thoughts, change what we know to be true. I can't remember what propaganda outlet it is. We just worked on a Best of the Left episode about Jeffrey Epstein.
Available anywhere you get your podcasts.
That's right.
And I didn't put this in the show, but I think his name's Greg Kelly, saying that, Ghislaine Maxwell, there was a lot going on and she's probably a victim. No, she's fucking not. She's convicted. She's a convicted felon. She's in jail, but they are actively changing the narrative around that. And they've moved her to a lower security facility. They're greasing the way towards making it okay that either she gets pardoned or her case is overturned and she's set free. And that just will be the way it is. And there are going to be people that accept that. And there are going to be people that just go along with it. But we can't go along with just blatant lies. I think we've talked about this on the show many times. Like corporations owning just art in general, movies, TV show, video games. Get you some physical media. If you like a book, you really like a book on your Kindle, on whatever you use, go find a copy of it. Get hard copies of things. We need to be able to have real records that cannot be altered just because some dictator, some corporate overlord decided, I don't like that information anymore. We need to change it.
And so to all of these ends, this article suggests this list: screenshot posts and threats, especially deleted ones from these pathetic political actors, archive news stories, government statements, and legislative actions, keep a private journal of what you see, hear, and feel, especially those details that might not make it into the news, and record public abuses safely and with time-stamped metadata when possible. So, we're all the media now. We're all the archivists now. And it is important to have records, at the very least, so that at some point in the distant future, they can be retrieved so that we can actually understand what happened.
It's not going to be a fun time, but there's important work that needs to be done during all of this.
A lot of this is being more present and making more active decisions. I think the internet has made everything easier in a way that's made things worse. And I think making choices and being like really thoughtful about what you're doing is kind of difficult on the internet because it just pushes you through. But doing these kind of things will make you more engaged just generally in your life. So be present, be aware, and make more active choices.
Which actually brings us to the very next section of the article: refuse the quiet slide into compliance. And it talks about how small acts of resistance actually do add up, and sometimes they're the only kind left. So we have to do what we can. So just a few suggestions. It says, refuse to self-censor when speaking out about injustice or fascism. Keep displaying symbols of resistance. If your workplace bans certain topics or discussions, find discreet ways to keep the truth circulating. Write letters to editors, school boards, and elected officials, even when you think no one is listening. Share banned books and read them aloud. Call out fascist rhetoric and policies in conversation, especially in spaces where silence has become the norm. And speak up for those being targeted, especially when you're not the one at risk. they feel small, so they feel inconsequential, but everything an individual does in the context of national politics is small and inconsequential. It is only collectively that we make a difference, but that's the whole concept of democracy. And so when fighting for democracy, you have to internalize that, internalize the need for everyday democracy, which is the ability to speak freely and convince people of your way of thinking and make your opinions known so that we can sort of push in a direction together.
Yeah. And not everything is going to make the news. That's not how this works. This is quiet stuff that also has to happen simultaneously, in addition to the big stuff. I do have one suggestion, one positive suggestion for if you're looking for something to read that is both practical, but also might give you some ideas, give you some hope. Kelly Hayes, she wrote the book Let This Radicalize You with Miriam Kaba, who's an amazing anti-prison activist. Kelly has a new book out that I think right now is in pre-orders, but will be out soon, called Read This When Things Fall Apart: Letters to Activists in Crisis. And while, yes, it is written to activists, I think we can all agree that we are all activists now, that we all will have some role to play in some way, whether just in your tight-knit community or more broadly. That's Read This When Things Fall Apart: Letters to Activists in Crisis by Kelly Hayes, and we'll put the link in the show notes.
And then the last couple of notes in this article to finish off, we've already touched a bit on the psychological effects of dealing with despotism. And so point number 6 in this article is to tend to the emotional and spiritual front. Caring for your emotional self isn't indulgence, it's preparation, it's protection, it's power. And so just a few suggestions. If you can, go to therapy, not just to process trauma, but to reclaim clarity. Host regular check-ins with people you trust. Make those check-ins routine and sacred. Dance, write, cook, paint, sing, anything that returns you to yourself. Let your body rest, and points out that burnout is not a badge of honor, one that is all too regular in a neoliberal era where we think that burnout is something to be proud of. It says your well-being isn't separate from the work. It is the work, and joy is a weapon they can never fully take away from us. So that's on the personal dealing with things as they are. And the final point is a brave one. It says, consider the exodus option. And he says, this one's hard to say out loud, but for some, staying may become too dangerous or too futile. Leaving isn't surrender. History is full of exiles who shaped resistance movements from abroad, from Einstein fleeing Nazi Germany to Chilean organizers escaping Pinochet. Diaspora politics have always been powerful. And so his advice is, if you're thinking about it, research visa options for safer countries, connect with global activist networks, and think about how you can continue the fight from wherever you land.
That one is definitely controversial because
Yeah.
I've thought about that many times. I thought, I should move my family out of country. Is that an option? It's not really an option. The Timothy Snyder and Jason Stanley, and I can't think of the other, the scholar on authoritarianism, now live in Canada. And there's a lot of backlash to them for doing that. But I think it's more of a, I don't know if it's jealousy is not the right word, but this feeling that, oh, you're saying all these things, but you're running away. But it's not running away to protect yourself. It is not running away if you think that your life or your family's life is in danger. That's not what that is.
Self-protection.
That is taking care of yourself. And people who have written books that name Trump about how dangerous he is, they're probably in physical danger. So it's not a bad option. And
they got some nice job offers too,
like
which,
that's
clearly it's that's another side, the privilege of it.
For them, there is the financial privilege of it. And it is for most people, it's financial privilege. Yep. We don't extend that to all the immigrants that are here because they did exactly that thing. Jason Stanley and Timothy Snyder are not doing exactly the same thing as a migrant worker who is here from Guatemala or leaving some sort of horrible drug war fueled nightmare. Not exactly the same thing, but it's the same principle. They fled their home, their safety, to come to another place where they felt more safe. But unfortunately for them, now they're in danger because this is not the safe place now.
Yep. Turns out.
And I would point out that their value to society, those scholars' value, is the work they're doing.
Right.
And they will be free to continue doing that work, which will benefit society, which is the point this article is making. Diaspora politics has always been powerful. Like, those people are going to be more powerful if they are allowed to continue doing their work and allowed to continue speaking out than if the regime comes down and actually tries to silence them. I mean, this is very grim. I would say, like, yeah, maybe they would become powerful in the like Obi-Wan Kenobi sense. Like, you know, you don't want to be a martyr to the cause if you can avoid it. Like, yeah, maybe that would be a benefit to really highlight things, but that's not how it's going to play out. And it's not worthwhile to demand anyone subject themselves to that sort of a threat. So for one, I didn't have any ill will towards those dudes when I was, perfect. Like, of course you're the people who should go first, and everyone has to judge it for themselves. Like, everyone's ability to leave is different, obviously, and everyone's risk assessment is wildly different. But those dudes' risk assessment they'd be way up on the scale for sure.
And this is like all they study and look at. And we read another article, I think we're going to talk about it in the members only section, where historians are saying, oh my God, all the stuff I studied forever about, thousands and hundreds of years ago is now starting to happen. This is pretty wild, right? So like if you're that close to the source material, how could you not? But the other thing is, look, it's really easy to say these kinds of things, like you're judging someone for what they're doing in theory. But then when it comes down to it and it's on your doorstep, you might feel differently. And I think we just need to allow that. We need to have space for that. This is all theoretical until it's not. And you might feel very differently about a number of things, this included, if things go very south.
Yeah. So I think I only said this on the member section a few weeks ago, but I'll bring it up now to close out, which is that I started having the idea about particularly immigrant communities in the US and how they can be pretty directly compared to Jews in Nazi Germany. They are the primary targeted group. And if you think back, like, we cannot know what is definitely going to happen in the United States in the next few years. But with the benefit of hindsight to Nazi Germany, you can understand that in the very early days, the progressive, moral, thoughtful thing to do would be to defend the Jews staying in Germany. And at some point, one of these, it's a slow burn. It's hard to pinpoint where that pivotal moment is, that at some point, the progressive, thoughtful, moral thing to do would be to encourage Jews to leave, not because you want them to, but for their own safety.
And to help people to leave. Yeah.
Yes, and to help people leave. Like, no one condemns Einstein for leaving Germany, right? We understand that all those who were able to flee and, heroically and luckily got away, no one thinks you should have stayed and stuck it out. And so I started thinking about, at what point does the progressive, moral, ethical perspective shift from defending immigrants in America to, not that we want you to leave, but for your own sake, it's hard to continue to encourage you to stay. And just because immigrants are Trump's top target, it's the obvious group to reference, but, it could go for anyone. I mean, if we're talking about anti-authoritarianism scholars, there's a point at which you might say, oh my God, what are you doing? You're saying we should stay and fight, but you're leaving. But at some point, there's a pivot where you're like, oh my God, you guys got to get out of here. Understanding that there is that pivot moment, I think, is clarifying, and recognizing that you're better off being ahead of it as a threatened community member or a threatened individual. You're better off knowing that pivot is coming at some point in the future and getting out ahead of it if you can. So yeah, I don't condemn people for taking the actions that they take. And I mean, to me, that's what this whole show is trying to understand the dynamics of what's happening, trying to understand what is potentially coming, not being surprised by it when it comes, and knowing how to act when it does or before it does. Because you'd be a whole lot better off forming strong community bonds so that you know who to trust and then never needing to put that to the test. That's ideal. But in the meantime, get out ahead of it. Did we solve it today? Did we solve
Fascism solved.
fascism? Okay.
We solved how to evaluate what is happening. There we go.
I thought you were going to be the one bringing the positive perspectives.
I did. I recommended a book. It's my positive contribution.
I was just going to go with having solved it, but I'll take your addendum. All right. If you have any thoughts about any of what we talked about today, there's a lot of it. You can leave us a message at 202-999-3991, send an email to j@bestofleft.com, or reach us on Signal at bestofleft.01. Thanks for listening, and remember that this is shockingly, but not at all surprisingly, if you've been paying attention for the last 20 years, really happening. So continue to be decent, act like what you do and say matters, and do what matters most.